On June 6th, 1944, I found myself on a landing craft, the gray waves of the English Channel slamming against the hull as we approached the Normandy coast. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and the metallic tang of fear. My hands gripping my rifle so tightly, my knuckles turned white. Dawn had barely broken, a faint orange glow on the horizon, but the sky was already alive with the roar of planes and the distant thump of artillery. I could feel the tension in my chest, a heavy weight that made every breath a conscious effort. I was a private in the 1st Infantry Division, one of thousands tasked with storming Omaha Beach, and the weight of that responsibility bore down on me as heavily as the pack on my back. The night before, I'd been aboard the transport ship, unable to sleep in the cramped hold where the air hung heavy with cigarette smoke and the low murmur of anxious men. I'd sat on my bunk, my hands fidgeting with the straps of my gear, my mind replaying the briefing we'd received. Our lieutenant had spread out a map of the Normandy coast, pointing out the German defenses, machine gun nests, barbed wire, minefields, and concrete pillboxes perched on the cliffs. He'd spoken in a steady voice, but I could see the strain in his eyes, the same fear that gnawed at me. I'd written a letter to my parents in Iowa, a few short lines telling them I loved them, and tucked it into my pack with instructions to mail it if I didn't return. The thought of my mother reading it, her hands trembling as she unfolded the paper, had kept me awake, staring at the steel ceiling until the call to assemble came. Now, as the landing craft rocked violently in the swell, I stood shoulder to shoulder with my squad, the cold spray of the channel soaking through my uniform. My wool trousers clung to my legs, the salt water stinging my skin, and my helmet felt heavy on my head, the chin strap digging into my jaw. The engine's growl vibrated through the deck, and I could hear the faint drone of Allied planes overhead, their shadows flickering across the waves as they headed inland to bomb German positions. The horizon was a dark smudge, the French coast growing closer with every passing minute, and I could see the flashes of naval gunfire from the destroyers behind us, their shells arcing through the sky to pound the enemy defenses. The air was alive with the sounds of war, a symphony of destruction that set my nerves on edge. I adjusted my grip on my M1 Garand, the wooden stock slick with moisture, and checked my pack for the dozenth time. Ammunition, grenades, a canteen, and a folded entrenching tool, all secured as best I could manage. The man next to me was breathing heavily, his eyes wide as he stared at the approaching shore, and I wondered if he could see the same dread in my face. I tried to focus on my training, on the drills we'd run back in England, but the fear was a living thing, coiling in my gut like a snake. I thought about home, the golden fields of our farm, the smell of my mother's cooking, the sound of my father's laughter, and pushed the memories away. There was no room for that now, not with the beach looming ahead, a crescent of sand that promised nothing but death. The first sign of resistance came as we neared the shallows, a shell exploding in the water nearby, the blast sending a geyser of foam into the air. The shockwave rocked our craft, and I ducked instinctively, my heart leaping into my throat. Then I heard the buzz of machine guns, the German MG-42s opening up from the cliffs, their tracers streaking through the air like deadly fireflies. Bullets pinged off the steel ramp at the front of the boat, and I saw another landing craft take a direct hit, its bow erupting in flames before it sank beneath the waves, the screams of its occupants swallowed by the sea. I clenched my jaw, my teeth grinding together, and forced myself to stay focused, to wait for the moment we'd hit the beach. The craft shuddered as it reached the shallows, the hull scraping against the sandy bottom, and the ramp dropped with a jarring clang that echoed over the roar of the waves. I surged forward with the others, my boots splashing into the icy surf, the cold biting through my socks and into my feet. The water was deeper than I'd expected, reaching my thighs, and I struggled to keep my balance as I waded toward the shore, the weight of my soaked gear pulling me down. Bullets zipped past, kicking up sprays of water and sand, and I saw men fall around me, their bodies crumpling into the waves, some sinking silently, others thrashing briefly before going still. Blood stained the water, a spreading crimson that mixed with the foam, and I felt a surge of panic, my legs moving faster as I pushed toward the beach. I reached the sand, the ground shifting beneath my boots as I sprinted across the open stretch, my lungs burning with the effort. Shells exploded nearby, sending plumes of dirt and shrapnel into the air, the concussion slamming into my chest like a fist. I dove behind a steel hedgehog obstacle, its jagged edges offering little cover, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I pressed myself into the sand. The grit coated my face, sticking to the sweat and salt water, and I could taste it on my lips, a bitter reminder of the hell I'd landed in. From my position, I could see the German fortifications on the bluffs, dark silhouettes against the morning light, their guns flashing with deadly precision, mowing down men who hadn't made it to cover. I forced myself to move again, crawling through the sand, my elbows scraping raw against the coarse grains as I inched toward the base of the cliffs. The noise was overwhelming, a cacophony of screams, the sharp crack of rifles, the deep thunder of artillery, and the whistle of mortars raining down. My ears rang from a nearby explosion, the sound muffled as if I were underwater, but I kept my focus on the path ahead, my training overriding the terror that threatened to freeze me in place. I reached a narrow, rocky path leading up the cliff, its steep incline littered with debris, shattered rifles, torn packs, and the bodies of soldiers who had tried to climb before me. Their lifeless forms sprawled across the ground, blood pooling in the dirt, a grim warning of what awaited if I faltered. I climbed, my hands clawing at the earth, my fingers digging into the muddy soil for purchase. My boots slipped on loose gravel, my knees banging against sharp rocks, every muscle in my body straining with the effort. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes, but I didn't dare stop to wipe it away. A bullet ricocheted off a boulder inches from my head, the whine of it sending a jolt of adrenaline through me, and I pressed myself flatter against the slope, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I kept going, inching upward, my breath coming in short, desperate gasps, until I finally reached the top, rolling into a shallow trench and landing hard on my side. The trench was a scarred, muddy scar in the earth, the air thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and smoke. I could see German soldiers ahead, their gray uniforms stark against the chaos, their movements frantic as they manned their positions. I raised my rifle, my hands trembling as I sighted down the barrel, and fired. The recoil jolted my shoulder, and I watched as one of them fell, his helmet rolling away like a discarded toy, his body crumpling into the dirt. I didn't have time to process it. I kept moving, clearing the trench with my squad, the enemy retreating under the weight of our advance, their shouts lost in the din of battle. By midday, the beach below was a graveyard, littered with the wreckage of landing craft, shattered equipment, and the bodies of the fallen. The sand was stained red, the waves lapping at the shore carrying a pinkish foam. I stood on the cliff, my chest heaving as I caught my breath, and looked out at the armada stretching across the channel. Ships stretched as far as the eye could see, destroyers, transports, and landing craft, their guns still pounding the German defenses, the flashes lighting up the horizon like a storm. I could sense the shift in momentum, a visceral realization that we had broken through, that the Germans were reeling from the sheer scale of our assault. My hands trembled as I reloaded my rifle, the clip pinging as it ejected, the adrenaline still coursing through me, but I knew in that moment that we had struck a blow they couldn't recover from. The afternoon brought more fighting as we pushed inland, crossing fields scarred by shell craters, the grass torn and blackened, the air heavy with the stench of burning metal and flesh. I moved through hedgerows, their dense branches snagging at my uniform, my eyes scanning for snipers hidden in the trees. I saw German prisoners being marched back to the beach, their faces pale and hollow, their hands raised in surrender as they shuffled past, guarded by grim-faced GIs. I felt no pity, only a grim satisfaction that we had hit them hard. that they understood the inevitability of their defeat. Their eyes avoided mine, their shoulders slumped, and I could see the weight of their realization. They knew they were doomed, that the Reich's grip on France was slipping through their fingers. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the battlefield, I found myself in a captured German bunker, its concrete walls cold and damp against my back. The floor was littered with spent casings and torn maps, the air inside stale and heavy. I sat there, my rifle resting across my knees, my body aching from the day's ordeal. My uniform was caked with mud and blood, some of it mine, some of it not, and my hands shook as I tried to light a cigarette, the match flaring briefly before I managed to get a drag. The smoke burned my throat, but it steadied me, giving me a moment to think. I thought about the men I'd lost, their faces flashing through my mind. Private Daniels, who'd been with me since basic training, cut down in the surf before he even reached the sand. Sergeant Miller, who'd taken a sniper's bullet while leading the charge up the cliff. I thought about home, the golden fields of our farm, the smell of my mother's cooking, the sound of my father's laughter. I thought about the Germans, how they must have felt when they saw our ships on the horizon, an endless wave of steel and fury bearing down on them. I wondered if they'd known, in that moment, that their war was lost. Night fell, the sky darkening to a deep indigo, the stars hidden behind a shroud of smoke. The sounds of battle had faded, replaced by the distant rumble of artillery and the occasional crack of a sniper's rifle. I could hear the wounded crying out in the darkness, their voices faint but haunting, a reminder of the cost of this day. I leaned my head back against the wall, closing my eyes for a moment, the exhaustion seeping into my bones. I knew the war was far from over. There would be more battles, more death, more nights like this. But on that blood-soaked stretch of Normandy, I felt the first flicker of certainty that we would win. The Germans had seen our resolve, our numbers, our unrelenting push, and they knew they couldn't hold. June 6, 1944, would be the day they realized their defeat was inevitable, and I had been part of making that happen.